I work with the fisheries program, and I'm going to talk to you guys today about some of our projects and things that we're working on, including our humpback chub translocations, some of our native fish surveys, and then our non-native fish control. So of the 9 native fish to the Colorado River, 75% of those are endemic, 50% of those are endangered, and another 50% of those are have been extirpated. And you see the question mark there on the razorback sucker. That's a species that we thought had been extirpated since the mid-1990s. And in 2012, with the help of some cooperators, we found some adult razorback suckers in Grand Canyon. So the fish that we're most concerned with right now are the humpback chub and the razorback sucker, which are both endemic and endangered. So why are the native fish in decline? As most of you know, Glen Canyon Dam, the implementation, the construction of that dam significantly altered the flow regime, the temperature, sediment deposition in the river, which was less favorable for our native fish, which prefer a warmer, more turbid environment. Also, the introduction of non-native fish into the river system has had a significant impact. The Park Service has introduced non-native fish in tributaries and the main stem for sport fishing. And we've since learned that that was maybe not the best idea. And brown trout in particular have a negative impact on our natives. And they compete for resources, and they also prey on the natives. So what are we doing to conserve native fish? The 3 things that the fisheries program is working on are translocations of humpback chub into tributaries, again, our non-native fish removal, and then our razorback sucker surveys in Lower Grand Canyon. So in regards to the translocations, there's a number of documents that guide our efforts. It was determined that a second spawning aggregation of humpback chub was important, and so that's something that we're working on. There was a study published in 2000 by Valdez and others that did an assessment, evaluated tributaries for suitability for translocations. And it was identified the top 3 sites were Havasu Creek, Shinnemoo Creek, and Bright Angel Creek. In Bright Angel Creek, it was noted, though, that there was a high number of non-natives. And so before any translocations were to take place, that would need to be mitigated for. So this is a map showing the distribution of humpback chub in the Colorado River Basin. In the upper basin, there are 5 populations. The 6th population is in Grand Canyon, centered right there around the Little Colorado River. And what's important to note is that the Grand Canyon population is the largest and the most stable. And a lot of those other populations in the upper basin are in decline or almost in salvage mode. So this is the map of Grand Canyon, and the arrows are pointing to those 3 tributaries, Bright Angel Creek, Shinnemoo Creek, and Havasu Creek, which is where we are focusing our efforts. So some of the possible outcomes of translocations include establishing a second spawning and recruiting population in the main stem or a tributary, having sufficient survival and growth to provide a rearing opportunity to augment the main stem aggregation. And of course, a third outcome would be that it didn't work at all. So some of the tasks that are involved in a translocation, those baseline surveys are conducted in those tributaries, which have been done. We collect our larval humpback chub from the Little Colorado River. And those collections are made in the spring, and those fish are then transported to a hatchery in New Mexico, a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service hatchery, where they're measured and weighed and pit tagged. They get flow trained so that they're ready to go back into the creeks when they get big enough. And then the translocation itself is done with the help of the NPS helicopter support, which is kind of a neat component to the projects. And then, of course, there's the monitoring of those populations and fish communities. And we We do those monitoring trips twice annually in the tributaries, and then once annually in the main stem. And those have been sort of inconsistent in the last couple years, but we're getting back to that. So these are kind of some of the things that we're going to use to look at the success of our translocations. We want to look at abundance of humpback chub, and we get those numbers from our spring sampling trip. We want to look at monthly apparent survival, and we assess that through our mark recapture analysis. And then we want to look to see if there's recruitment to maturity of the translocated fish. So in Havasu Creek, we've done translocations from 2011 to 2016. We've translocated almost 2,000 chub into that creek. And so when we look at some of the results of those translocations, what we've seen over the sampling periods over the course of the years, as far as abundance goes, we want to maintain a minimum of 200 fish, which is the number that has been established to, it's a healthy, genetically diverse population. And so we see that over the years we have been maintaining that number. And then second, looking at apparent survival, and this is relative to humpback chub in the Little Colorado River. And we see that over the year it's a 91% apparent survival. And we were reaching that goal in 2015-16. There was a dip there, but analysis from the 2017 surveys are indicating that we're on track with that as well. And so this is a graph looking at the evidence of reproduction and recruitment to maturity. And so the average for mature reproductive humpback chub is around 200 millimeters. And these are results from a May 2016 survey. And the gray area is showing the number of non-translocated chub in mature and reproductive state. So we are seeing evidence of that recruitment and reproductive maturity. So this is just to summarize. We're reaching our goals for abundance, apparent survival, reproduction. We've seen evidence of that since 2012, and then also recruitment to mature size. So those are all on track. It is a success story in Havasu, and it's a ongoing monitoring effort there. So we also translocated chub into Shinemu Creek between 2009 and 2013. We translocated about 1,100 fish into that creek, and we were meeting all of the objectives for those fish in that population during the time of survey. And we were also seeing evidence of augmentation to the main stem. We were catching chub around the confluence there. As most of you know, there was a large fire on the North Rim in 2014, the Galahad Fire, and subsequent flooding deposited wood and debris and ash and pretty much wiped out the fish community in that system, including the humpback chub and the bluehead suckers. So next steps for our translocations. We don't have any translocations planned in 2018. We are still collecting larval chub from the LCR, and they're hanging out at the hatchery, growing and getting strong for future translocations into Havasu and Shinemu, and ultimately, eventually, Bright Angel. We'll continue to monitor those fish communities in Shinemu and Havasu. And just check for the genetic integrity and population goals. We're also monitoring Shinemu Creek, looking for that habitat recovery from the fire and flood. We are electrofishing. There are populations of non-natives in Shinemu, so we are electrofishing to remove those non-natives. We're doing hoop netting in the main stem around Shinemu. And yeah, we'll continue to analyze those results. So another component, another big effort that we have undertaken is the non-native trout removal in Bright Angel Creek. that was necessary, before we could translocate any chubs. So we just completed the 6th year of a 5-year adaptive management strategy. And that project includes the operation of a weir, which is a trap at the mouth of Bright Angel Creek, to intercept any non-natives or that might try to come up into the creek and spawn. And we've been operating that between October and February since 2012, very consistently. We have done some boat electrofishing around the confluence of Bright Angel Creek and the Colorado River. And then we've been doing the backpack electrofishing, the full reach of Bright Angel Creek, which is about 12 miles. An important component of that project, there was concern from the affiliated tribes about taking life from the creek. Roaring Springs, or Ribbon Falls, is a sacred place to the Zuni. And so through consultation with the tribes, it was decided and determined that any fish that came out of Bright Angel Creek would go to beneficial use, which means the larger fish are cleaned and gutted, vacuum sealed, and then given away for human consumption. The smaller fish are bagged and they're given to the tribes. We've given a lot to the Zuni tribe to feed their ceremonial eagles. We've given some to Hopi and Navajo as well. So what we're going to look at to see if our efforts were successful with the electrofishing, we wanted to see an overall reduction in the non-native fish populations in the creek. And we would look at that, we wanted to see changes in abundance and size structure over time. We also wanted to look at our native fish populations in the creek and make sure that we weren't having a negative impact on them. And so we wanted to see their numbers maintaining or increasing. And we look at that, by abundance and recruitment and survival. So this is a graph showing the operation of the weir. It's been in operation off and on since 2002, consistently since 2012. And what we saw in those early years is, we were seeing a lot of non-natives, browns and rainbows in that trap. There's a study in 2003 that identified that Bright Angel Creek, there's a large concentration of browns right around that confluence. And so it was an area that we needed to concentrate on. So some of the results, population metrics, the browns and rainbows in that creek. On the left, you've got brown trout, on the right, rainbows. And those upper graphs are just showing abundance over time. And what we see is a steady decline. We had an uptick in rainbows in 2014-15, but overall, just a consistent and steady decline in their numbers. And the bottom two graphs are showing the length frequencies by season. And again, you see kind of just an overall reduction in number and a change in those length frequencies. We were worried a lot of times after initial trout removal, you've got an uptick, a compensatory response, and that we saw that in both species, but over time we overcame that uptick in numbers. And then this is a graph just showing biomass removed of browns and rainbows over time, which is significant. So when we were looking at our native fish, we wanted to make sure we weren't having a negative impact. And what we saw in speckled dace over all reaches was that their numbers have been increasing. And this last year, the data hasn't been analyzed, but I think our last tour, they caught like 3,000 dace in one trip. So they seem to be doing quite well. And the graph on the right is it's a completely different graph, but it's showing the flannel mouth suckers. And what we saw, this is 2015-16, we hadn't seen this subadult class of flannel mouth suckers in the creek before, which is an indicator that they're overwintering in the creek. Maybe there's less predation pressure, more resources, things like that. So they seem to be faring well also. And these are graphs showing bluehead sucker. And I think what's most, significant here is in these last 2 years, we see this, this younger cohort of bluehead suckers. And again, they maybe less predation pressure, more resources, things like that. So they seem to be faring well. So, okay, Bright Angel Creek next steps, translocation of humpback chub. We're in the process of working through that. The 5-year data has been analyzed. We've gotten recommendations to move forward with translocation. So we're trying to work out all those details. We need to continue our removal efforts either at the current level or reduced level. We'll assess that. The use of chemical pesticides is also on the table. Of course, we need more compliance or conversations to be had about that. Just real quick, razorback sucker work. These are surveys we do with cooperators, and they've been ongoing for over 5 years. And they're seeing increases of razorback suckers, and we're also doing some sonic tagging and surveying monitoring of those fish as well. So that's pretty exciting. And I just want to identify and thank all of our cooperators and also all the volunteers that help us out. All right, any questions? Oh, so he asked if there's any way to tell if the native fish are adapting to the changing conditions and doing fine. I don't know the exact answer to that. As far as surveys with the humpback chub, the populations in the LCR are good and strong. In Havasu, they seem to be doing well. So, yeah, the tributaries, they're doing good. Did everybody hear that question? So he asked about communication between fire managers in regards to the Galahad fire and fisheries, the fisheries program, and maybe lessons learned or how we might communicate better. And I think the fire management strategy on the North Rim in those areas is to kind of let it burn. And so it's just a natural process, and the result of that is, it kind of happened as it did, and that Shinnemoo Creek is recovering, and it seems to be doing quite well. So we'll be back in there and hopefully reintroduce chub into the system. I think it's part of kind of all the natural process. So yeah, so the issues with the fishery, the fisheries there at Lee's Ferry is a little bit more complicated. They kind of manage that for rainbow trout fishery. The brown trout there are increasing, and it is a concern. And so we also have a kind of a side project. Bob Shelley works with our program, and he's tagging the brown trout to try to understand their movement and behavior. So we're trying to understand the brown trout better. Rainbows aren't as much of a threat, but yeah, there's a concern there, and we're trying to figure out how to move forward and manage for that, for the fishery and the native fish. So, okay, yeah.